Welcome to Business Day Shorties. This is a show where we give a quick analysis on key issues affecting Nigeria's economy. Today we are looking at why the Nigeria's power sector reform is failing. I am Madichinea Lillian, and with me is our in-house analyst. His name is Mr. Patrick Atwaya. Welcome, Mr. Patrick.
Yeah, welcome, viewers. Thank you, Chinea.
Okay, so what is the current state of this reform, and why Nigerians not seeing a stable power supply?
Thank you. To answer that question, we have to go back to the reasons for the reforms in the first place. So we had a power sector that had the wrong incentives to the actors playing in the sector. So government was the generator and distributor and also in charge of transmission. And a lot of the capital expenditure needs of the system were not being met by a government that could only fund probably 5 to 10% of what is needed in any given year for the sector. So the government decided to unbundle the generation and distribution part of the whole network and sell it to private sector players. So that effort ended sometime in November 2013. Now, currently, we're having issues on the sector moving forward because of three major issues. You have the issue of lack of capex, which is capital expenditure by the new private sector owners. You have the lack of availability of gas, and because roughly 70% of the generating capacity or the plant generating capacity in Nigeria is from thermal gas-fired power plants. And you also have the issue of lack of a commercially viable tariff to underpin all the chain in the power sector, whether it's gas tariffs or electricity tariffs or even the transmission tariffs. So those are the three major issues, and I'll take them one by one. So in the issue of capex spend, it is estimated that Nigeria needs like $3.5 billion a year to bridge the deplorable state of its power infrastructure. So to build out new transmission lines, new generating capacity, new distribution capacity. So every year that has to be spent just to help us grow our power output gradually and make it stable. Unfortunately, since the private sector owners took over these power assets, there has been very little capex spent by them. So there's a number of reasons for this. One is they took on a lot of debt to buy these assets, a lot of them. So debt as opposed to equity, that is bringing their own money to buy this. They chose to borrow from the banks. So the banks, Nigerian banks, financed this acquisition to the tune of about $3 billion, thereabouts, almost 90% of it. So these firms are now saddled with paying back or servicing some of this debt, and they cannot at the same time raise the money because the banks are not willing to give them additional money to plow back into these assets. So you are seeing some of the capex spend, the promises not coming true. They also have issues of the whole network itself. It's not very viable. So if the power sector new owners go to a bank and say, lend me money, the bank will look at their books and see that for now they've not really been able to make some of the expected upsides from the sector work in terms of revenue, expected revenues. As a matter of fact, some of the DISCO revenues are even lower now than they were before the FG, federal government, handed it over to the private sector. So as a result of all this, the capex spend, and also you have a political uncertainty. You have the elections, and a lot of these people are saying, if you have a new government that comes in and reverses or reviews the power prioritization, then what is going to happen to all the money they spend? So that they are taking a wait and see approach to investing in the sector. You know, so because of that, the CBN came in and tried to bail out. You know, there's a 213 billion naira bailout for the firms, and but we've not seen some of that trickle down. Then the second issue is the issue of gas. We run a very funny system in Nigeria, whereby we have one of the largest gas reserves in Africa, but we don't have enough gas to power our power plants, and the biggest, and even our industrial needs, you know, companies that are providing off-grid electricity. The biggest culprit of this is, you know, the low or the government-controlled tariff, you know, for the gas sector. It's right now is about 250 per standard 1,000 standard cubic feet, $250 plus 80 cents for transportation. Now, a lot of companies that would like to go into gas production are held back by the significant capex needs that it will entail, and the prospects of having to play in a market that is still regulated by the government. The 250 per scope is a recent development anyway, but it used to be as low as 70 cents in 2007. So government just recently increased it, but you know, we think to unleash the potential of the sector, because we already have the gas, okay, so all you need is capital to go in there, build the gas processing plants and extract the gas and build the pipelines to send it to people that want to pay for it. So government has to get out of, you know, being in the middle of all that, you know. So that's an issue. We also have some issues with the NNPC, because a lot of the gas fields, by default, NNPC owns 60% of them, you know, as the national oil company. And a lot of times they've not been able to develop the fields, but they've not been willing to let go of the major gas fields to private companies that are willing to develop it. So that is also an issue. Then the third major issue is the issue of low tariff across the board. You have the electricity tariffs are quite, in our opinion, they are not reflective of current realities. You have a devalued naira, you have inflation creeping up, you have a tough business environment, you know. So you have low tariffs at the retail end. You also have the TCN recently applied to NERC for an increase in tariffs, because they claim that they cannot, the tariffs they charge the discos, the GENCOs, it's not adequate for them to do their capital expenditure needs. You know, so I think tariffs have to rise across board in the sector. It's a complex sector, and you know, the more you have the private sector playing a bigger role and government getting out of it, of setting tariffs and you know, across board, and you know, playing a bigger role, then you see more positive in the whole sector.
Okay, so what do you think is the way out for these three major issues holding back power supply?
Okay, coming to the issue of capex, unfortunately the political space will not get better until maybe 2-3 months from now. There's been a general slowdown in activity across Nigeria, whether it's services, hotels, conferences, you know, all kinds of activities. So it's affecting this sector also. So, but we think that after the elections, if there's some clarity, if there is a continuity of the current administration, then you begin to see more capex spend in the sector. The CBN, like I mentioned earlier, has come out to bring out a bailout fund for the sector, 213 billion. Some of the firms have been able to receive some of these funds, about 5 or 6 discos, but they've not really embarked on any major capex spend. The only major people who are seeing spending money or announcing intent to spend are the GENCOs, and I know some of the buyers have announced plans to increase capacity. The federal government has also been commissioning some NIPP projects that's generating plants, So, but for the other part of the chain, the discos, which are closest to the customers and the transmission, I think there has to be some move towards really going big in terms of capex to improve the ability to receive power, that is the discos, and to improve the ability to transmit power for the TCN. And one other thing on the TCN, there might be a need for TCN to float bonds that is mentioned by the organization before, because some of their capex needs they're talking about is quite high. It's running to billions of dollars. But right now we only have about 6,000 megawatts, between 6 and 7,000 megawatts of transmission capacity. So even if you boost generation to 20,000 megawatts and there's no transmission capacity, then you will not see, when you flick on your light bulb, you will not see power. So I think transmission is key, but we'll begin to see more some of those capex spent after the elections. Coming to gas, I think the gas issue, the government also has to try and get out of the way of setting prices in this, gas prices. Everywhere that government has set prices in this economy, it has been a failure. Whether it's in refining, that's why we have fuel scarcity today, or whether it's in your electricity sector, you don't have electricity, So the government has to get out of that role of trying to set gas prices. It should allow a willing buyer, willing seller model to come on board. There's some of it now, but they should make it the major plank for its gas policy, whereby a firm that develops its gas and is willing to sell should be able to set its price, and also the buyer should be able to set its own price. So there should be negotiation across board. The government should also nudge NNPC into either selling off some of its gas fields that it cannot develop, or going into partnership with some of these firms that want to develop those gas fields. We have about 187 trillion, like I mentioned earlier, cubic feet of gas, and there's really no reason why we've not been able to develop those fields. If you look at the US, the ability to move where they are in terms of shale gas, the growth of the shale gas industry, is because the government has regulated to an extent, but has really let the shale players do what they do best. That is raise money, buy up acreages, and then pump the money into building up infrastructure to tap the gas and oil, and production has skyrocketed. So the government has to get out of the gas industry, especially in terms of setting prices for there to be gas, because there is demand, there's domestic demand for gas. So and there's gas. So it's just there's a market failure in between. That's why you're not having gas. Then in the issue of low tariffs, I think there should be a gradual increase in tariffs, but there should be, or maybe a one-off hike in tariff, then after that a gradual increase. I mean, everybody has a generator today in Nigeria spends about, according to NERC, some studies done by NERC, about between 60, naira and 80 naira per kilowatt hour, right, to fuel this generator. But you are setting electricity tariffs at around 15 naira, you know. So if when people fill up their generators and they run it 12, 13 hours straight. So I think the cost of electricity has to go up a little bit in Nigeria to enable the sector to be viable and bankable, so that when discos receive electricity, they can pass it on to the final consumer, and then they can get a good rate for that electricity so that they can pay the GENCOs. Right now there's some issue. The NEC chairman made allusions to the fact that some discos are even rejecting power from GENCOs because they are not able to pay for it, because when power is generated and it's, you know, is transmitted to the discos cannot store this power. They have to send it to the consumers, right? Now, if they send all this power to the consumers and what they're getting back is not, they are not unable to pay for what they've been supplied, then you know you have a market failure right there. So the incentive should be for the discos to generate as much, to distribute as much power to the final consumer as possible, rather than trying to stay within a certain zone, maybe just 2,000 megawatts that they're comfortable that they can pay for, as opposed to, you know, higher quantity of power that they feel like at the end of the day, after supplying this power, when they pay, when the customers pay the bill at the end of the month, they cannot pay the GENCOs. You know, so that is also another major issue that the sector is grappling with. So, you know, if the tariffs rise, it will solve that issue.
Okay, so are there any prospects for a stable power supply in the near future?
Well, if some of these issues are tackled, then you set in motion a virtuous, it's called a virtuous cycle of, you know, you have a viable sector. So you have the GENCOs, the gas suppliers will supply the GENCOs, that's generating companies. Generating companies will supply the distribution companies. The distribution companies will supply your end user. The end user will pay cost-reflective tariffs to the discos. The discos will pay the GENCOs, and the GENCOs will pay the gas suppliers. And you have a cycle that works. Of course, you have TCN in the middle that also gets some tariff from some of these players. You know, so if all these issues are sorted out by less than 2-3 years, you should probably comfortably see north of 10,000 megawatts, which will be enough to, you know, give you relatively stable power supply. But the thing with power supply is that it encourages economic activity. So if you are supplied more power, there's tendency that you probably use more gadgets. As people get richer, they will buy more energy sucking gadgets. So the more power that is supplied, the more economic activity that it creates, the more power that will be demanded. You know, but again, if the fundamentals of the system are right, it will only lead to the system being more viable as power is being increasingly demanded across Nigeria. And as long as there is a cost-reflective tariff that is being paid across the chain, then the investors will be willing to, you know, invest in the extra infrastructure needed to transmit and distribute all this power. And then, you know, the final consumer will flip on that light switch and, you know, receive power. You know, so it's a matter of sorting out some of these issues. It's complex, but it can be solved if there's a political will, and if whoever comes in, if the Jonathan administration comes in and, you know, doubles down on the power sector and makes sure some of these issues are corrected, then in no time we will see the sector thrive. And if it's a position that comes in, then they have to actually make the sector work, because there's no alternative. Government cannot fund this sector on its own. the government budget is not big enough. They don't have the money, and with all the corruption involved in government funding of big infrastructure projects, it's just better left to the private sector. So that's the outlook there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Patrick Gatwaya, for your time. Thank you for coming in on the show. It's still BD Shortix, and I'm Amadi Chinea Lillian. Thank you.